Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a little bit of a discussion here on something that comes up a lot, namely the idea that you've actually finished Tactics Ogre, as it were, which is a little bit of an odd one. Basically, this game is one that has a tendency not to end, and in many cases, I've seen many folks coming in, leaving comments and things, saying something to the effect of like, okay, you know, I one-shot everything, there's nothing in this game that can challenge me anymore, you know, what's the point of all these optimizations and things? So, the thing is, if you're in that position, you're kind of at the point where you're, you know, just curb stomping things left and right, there's no challenge left in front of you, there's a pretty solid chance that you also don't have a fear of chickens. Now, the thing is, unless you have a fear of chickens, then you can't truly say that you've experienced the end game of Tactics Ogre. See, it has a tendency to keep on going. A lot. Like, a lot. Like, it tends to keep going and going and going and going and going. The thing is, if you are, for example, in Chapter 4 and you're thinking, wow, I just beat the game, you know, nothing can touch me, I'm literally invincible, you've completed the story mode. In many cases, this could be seen as kind of a soft tutorial for the rest of the game, but you have not completed the actual challenges that it's got in store. The actual final challenge of the game is going to be the very final fight of Coda 4, complete with doing the entire thing using a trio. Now, the thing is, that is in and of itself, even by itself, quite frankly, going to be more unreasonable for most folks to ever get to. All of Coda 4 ramps up in difficulty to a degree that, well, catches a lot of folks off guard, quite frankly. So they added a bit of an off-ramp, and that was Chapter 4. Chapter 4 and Coda 1 basically give you this little moment of like, okay, here's a few little challenges, you know, here's a few things here or there that you might have some difficulty with. Nothing too crazy, but you know what, if you're done here, good. All well and good. You go ahead and you have yourself a nice day. This is kind of like if you've ever played the campaign of any Pokemon game, where, you know, the true craziness always lies in the post game, but you know, your story was just kind of there as set dressing up to that point, right? You can maybe experience some new stuff going through a playthrough, you can maybe see some new stuff coming out of challenge runs or whatnot, but realistically speaking, that campaign playthrough probably wasn't going to be your full experience, you know? Anyway, so let's go ahead and take that one step further here. For the sake of context, typically whenever you're going and playing through something like Coda, or rather, when you're going through the story, it's typically going to take you somewhere in the ballpark of about 20 to 30 hours. Now, for the sake of context, Coda, depending on how much of it you want to do, can be anywhere from like, well, I guess it depends on whether or not you've unlocked the shortcuts. If you've unlocked the shortcuts, you can maybe see another 20-30 hours out of Coda, but if you feel like going for the full experience, you can easily see like 400 to 600 hours out of Coda just by itself. And bear in mind that it ramps up a lot, like a lot. Like Coda 1 is a nice little kind of dipping your toes in kind of moment. Stuff's a little bit harder. You kind of see what they're going for, where it's taking you through Pirate's Graveyard and basically showing you like, look, we have some new encounters down here. Stuff's changed. Maybe go back and re-experience some of these older areas. Maybe you'll find something new. You know, who knows? Maybe there's some fun stuff down there. And so you start looking around, you know, you start experiencing these new zones and seeing some new stuff and, you know, new stuff here and there. You know, maybe that recruitable lich became a frozen ice lich. Maybe there's some new ghost encounters or what have you. Who knows? Either way, there's just new stuff going on down there. So, at any rate, we now go ahead and continue on through something like Palace of the Dead. And the early game, sure, nothing really anything terribly fancy. But then as you go on, you start realizing that, oh, you know, there's actually way harder stuff the deeper you go down, and they added more floors than the first time around. And then all of a sudden, if you've, for example, completed those shortcuts, you start coming to that realization of, oh, you know, there's actually a bunch of extra boss fights down here. There's heaven generals and things dropping fancy new weapons. There's there's all kinds of new little encounters. And as you go through stuff like Palace of the Dead, you find all of those encounters that they were, frankly, understandably worried about putting into the main story. Situations where, for example, you have entire swarms of cockatrices. Now, this is why I say that the endgame is mostly identified, and you can tell if somebody's gone through the postgame as to whether or not they're afraid of birds. Because they start they start utilizing a lot of these units that you typically didn't see that often in far more interesting ways. The most obvious of which, again, is personally to me the cockatrices, where they're going to have such an advantage in pretty much everything that they do that typically you're going to see near guaranteed petrification odds, and due to the fact that they start far away and they're all moving in unison, you're seeing situations where all of them are going to be landing at the same time. So you're going to be seeing cases where it's like, okay, there's a bunch of easy enemies over here, it's just some chickens over there, whatever, and then suddenly, turn 3 or 4 rolls around depending on your situation, and you get your Dragoon up there, like, oh, I'm gonna go one-shot that thing. Why do I do like 25% of its health? Because their defense is suddenly far higher, and they have a different element now. Or, for example, that turn 3 or 4 rolls around, and now, a solid half your team is suddenly disabled and petrified, and now you have to see, what exactly is going to be your best play here. In terms of getting over that petrification, did you bring any eases with you? Did you bring any Garen powder with you? Is it just going to be easier to nuke your own teammates and revive them? How are you getting around this situation? And then you start realizing, oh, they can also double round you, so that's fun too. But anyways, it just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding in all kinds of new kind of fun and interesting ways in terms of just like new party compositions, new kind of fights that you run into. Like, oftentimes it's underappreciated when there's things like you have your cases where they'll put in like a wall of golems or something and have a bunch of really fast debuff spammers behind them, like a bunch of ninjas and such, or potentially they'll have cases where there's just a ton of ridiculously bulky units, or maybe they'll end up throwing in a bunch of hyper armor units in one place, or maybe they'll just have an entire team of reflection dragons or something. It's just like all the stuff that they were worried that would essentially cause people to just slam the door on their way out if they put it into the regular game is just kind of hanging out there in post game. And again, it ramps up in difficulty to a degree that you would not believe if you've never been there, if you've never been through it at least once. Honestly, you really do not see that come up that often in terms of just like last minute difficulty spikes. Like, there's end game dungeons, and then there's like end game, like 80% of the content is back there. So this is, if you're wondering why I recommend so many weird optimizations or weird builds or what have you, and you potentially haven't seen that kind of stuff, that's what all of this stuff is for. That's what all of it is building up to. There's situations where, yeah, that dodge buff is going to be enough to save you in some of those situations where stuff has just gone incredibly dire. Those situations where you want to be focusing on things like debuffs, like those cases where when there's going to be multiple, like, let's say, phoenixes coming down or whatnot. Bear in mind, you can actually run into several of these units in the regular main story, but you have to kind of know where to find them. Like, technically, there's a shortcut in Hanging Gardens that leads you to a den of phoenixes. And in most cases, most new players will have no frickin' clue how to get past that. But, again, the entire post-game is just like, okay, we expect you to, for example, go into San Bronza and understand how to deal with 4 phoenixes at once. Like, these things are going to come in, they're going to drop weaken on any of your heavier hitters. If you're trying to sort it out with the Dragoon, you're probably gonna need to get a Terranite involved or get a Breach involved in order to make that particular kill happen. Because realistically, even with something like Bane and Slayer activated, they are going to easily overpower their primary counter and whatnot. So you're going to see a lot of those cases where you're going to need to start paying more attention to how to get past defenses, how to always attack effectively, how to stall certain things out, because realistically it's not practical to go fight it directly. Just a lot of these fun little situations that you don't get to see come up that often during the main story. So this is really when the gloves start coming off. Like right here, this is just kind of Palace 102. But San Bronze is really the best example of all this stuff. I really probably should have done more for SB when I was over there, but I'm going to be back over there to do more Heaven General stuff, I don't know, next week or so. We'll get back there at some point. But if at any point you were going through and maybe you've seen some of these guides and videos and you're wondering what is the point of all of this crazy optimization, what is the value of all these units that I keep saying are really darn good, that's what it's there for. That's like, those are those situations that it really, really matters. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful for you. Let's see, can we actually make that happen? If they crit, maybe. What are your odds of critting? I don't know. But like these situations right here where like you're hoping to have been able to accidentally roll a lucky crit here, go for the double exorcism with a starfall because you can't dedicate the time to actually properly exercise these guys in some other way. Like those cases where you start appreciating living units a whole lot more because now all of a sudden you're able to revive a lot faster, and it's just going to be a lot easier to use your clerics than it is to put a necromancer in there. Like, there's just so many little things you start appreciating, so many cool kind of multi-purpose builds that you start appreciating a whole lot more as the game goes on, and I love this progression. It just feels so dang natural this time around, and this will be especially noticeable for anyone that's ever played through the original, where there's just going to be those moments in the original that there were certainly those moments where stuff felt a little bit out of place. This time around, it's definitely a lot more cozy. The progression feels a lot more tight. The kind of build up, the way that you're always pretty much guaranteed to be running some pile of relics, even if they're different every single time. It's not a case of do you have the thing or don't you. Like, you're probably going to have most of every relic on your way through. Some are going to be better than others, but it always gives this vibe of every run feeling a little bit different. And if you feel like min-maxing, you can go get all of it at the same time. But realistically, there's not really a gigantic need to do so. You can get by with even minimum stat units and just kind of whatever you find along the way. It's just a matter of playing creatively. But anyway, oh, and I've actually started appreciating the Ranger at this point too. This is a unit that I've always kind of been disappointed by, and then recently I realized it's Archer with Steadfast. How the hell did I not pick up on that earlier? It's actually a pretty massive deal if you think about it. Anyway, I'm gonna stop bending your ear about all this stuff at this point. Y'all have yourselves a good one. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for stopping by, and hopefully this helps to explain a few things. Again, remember, the true endgame doesn't start until the birds have fed you some humble pie. Take care.